Joining us again, haven't talked to him since the week after the Super Bowl. You can hear him on the Believe in Eagles podcast, our good friend Mike Mayock. Mike, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. How you guys doing?
What's up, Mike? A little bored. The Eagles won the Super Bowl, and they haven't done a whole lot in free agency, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mike, we're so used to it's been a very, very different opening of free agency for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think we're all sort of prepared for something like this, but maybe nothing as extreme as it's been. What have you thought about their moves this week and the strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, when I put my general manager hat on and look at what alternatives are out there for the Eagles, it kind of had to go like this. They've had the best roster in football for 3 years. They've been to the Super Bowl 2 of the last 3 years. People are paying a premium in free agency for the Eagles players. And a couple things are happening. I mean, the Eagles have about $60 million in dead cap money this year, which is the third most in football. So an adjustment had to happen. So between having $60 million in dead cap and people overpaying for your players, it was going to be difficult. And my hope was that they could get Saquon and maybe Milt Williams because, I love Milt. He's 25. But, Milt got over $50 million guaranteed for 2 years effectively. So that's kind of a long way of saying that, I expected it. It almost had to go this way. It doesn't mean they're going to be a bad football team. All it means is they've got to retool a little bit. Can't be as aggressive this year. But if you look at all the free agents they lost this year, you're going to reap the benefits next year with the compensatory draft picks. So, the Eagles have 8 picks this year and 8 next year. That's 16. They're probably going to get 3 or 4 compensatory picks next year, which will bring them to 19 or 20 picks. And if you want to retool, be aggressive, and get really good again, in the NFL, that's how you do it, draft picks.
Yeah, we're looking at the strategy that the Eagles are using, Mike. And as a GM, I'm just wondering, you come off a season like they're having, I'm wondering, does it make it more difficult to make these decisions, or because they won a Super Bowl, do they feel like they have the wiggle room or at least the freedom to be able to make these type of tough decisions by not retaining some of these young players? I mean, they retained Zach Bond, but obviously you win the Super Bowl, it doesn't hurt as much when you lose the other players.
Yeah, I think they knew no matter what, win, lose, or tie,
right,
this was going to be an adjustment year for them. And the good news is you went to your second Super Bowl in 3 years and you won this one. So I think in the building, very quietly, they're kind of high-fiving each other and saying, hey, we knew this was coming. It's a day of reckoning, but it's really not even a bad day. They're
right.
going to be one of the most talented teams in the league. All the players they lost, like, if you look behind them on the depth chart, are talented young guys just because they've drafted well. Mm-hmm. So, I don't really feel the remorse, perhaps, that most of Philadelphia does right now.
Mike Mayock with us. Mike, you mentioned the draft a bunch of times, and we've talked about it a lot. We've talked about the compensatory picks, and the Eagles have had a good 2-3 years on the draft. But the draft is tough to be good at, and when you look at their record before that, maybe not so great as consistently. Do you think this is something they've gotten better at, or is it something they're just in a maybe it's a good run, but you can't really sort of have that consistency that they've had the last few years?
I'd like to believe that who they are over the last few years is who they're going to be. And what I think Howie's done a great job with is he's had a lot of people steal his personnel from him, and that's what happens when you win. Both coaches and the personnel department, people come after you. But he hires former GMs. He's got 2 or 3 former GMs on his staff. He, I think, creatively has continued to make his process better and better. So I think they're going to draft well. And I'll give you an example. The Milt Williams. Milt Williams was a third-round pick. He's 25. God, you hate losing Milt Williams. I hate losing Milt Williams. He's coming into the prime of his career. But the defensive tackle class this year in the draft is really deep. And I get excited, and maybe because I'm a former GM, I get excited looking at that class going, man, who's the next Milt Williams? Is it the kid from Toledo? Is it the kid from Florida State? Who is it? And so I think they're going to continue to draft well. And I think if you're an Eagle fan, man, don't worry. I mean, things are still going to be really good for quite a while.
There we go. See?
Yeah.
See?
Oh, wow.
See, Spike?
Well,
I don't need to push the panic button.
Well, Mike, here's what I respect. But you do. Not everybody we have on calls it down the middle. I have felt like in the the half season that we've had you on, you do call them like you see them. This is making me feel a little bit better. I want to run through a few of the guys they have signed, and if you just want to go pass, I don't know. Please feel welcome, or feel you're welcome to do that. Any thoughts on the A.J. Dillon signing?
I'm a Kenneth Gainwell fan. Loved his special teams in addition to third down play. A.J. Dillon is a big bruising back coming off an injury. I'm a fan maybe because he went to Boston College, but he's still 26 years old. Former second-round pick with a ton of talent. If he's healthy, he can help the Eagles.
Anything on Josh Uche?
Uche is similar to some of the guys they have. He's kind of an undersized, twitchy edge rusher. Doesn't have a lot of length, but he's quick and twitchy. He's another, he's had 20 sacks in 5 years. I think that's veteran insurance, a little bit like Adoree Jackson, who played a lot of football, 82 starts. But Adoree Jackson is still only 29 years old, and you get a little nervous because not only is Slay gone, but Isaiah Rodgers is gone. So I think what Howie's done at both those positions is bring some veteran experience in just to cover himself.
Last thing for me, Mike. Saquon had 507 touches last year. And we've mentioned it a bunch of times. It's not a secret that when you look at backs who touch the ball 400 times, they're next year either not as productive or injury-riddled, those sorts of things. And I think everybody, the Eagles included, want to go into next season and say, how do we sort of minimize the impact on Saquon so we can have him all year? If you're the Eagles, are you saying we have to find a way to pass the ball more? Or are you saying we got to find a way to give the ball to Will Shipley and A.J. Dillon, and maybe we can run the ball as much, but we can't run the ball as much with Saquon?
Yeah, I think what their identity was last year, one offensively, what took them to the Super Bowl was their physicality and run game. And I don't know why you get away from that. I think it can help your pass game become more efficient, but why get away from a run game that was the best in the NFL? So the way I look at it is A.J. Dillon is a punishing runner. He was a second-round pick for a reason. Will Shipley came on last year. He's going to be efficient and effective on third down. And I think you're right. I think you're a little bit more judicious with Barkley, especially early in the year, and you let him build into it. I mean, I think he's really smart. I think he'll take care of his body. I think the Eagles will take care of his body in training camp in the offseason. And I think the goal has got to be the long goal. It's got to be, we're going back to the playoffs and we want a Super Bowl run, and he's got to be the guy. So let's take a little bit of the load off of him.
Yeah. It's been 1 week in free agency, Mike. I know it's still a lot of time for teams to add players, but a lot of the big-name players are off the market right now. Who's done the best job of the teams around the league to close the gap between the Eagles and themselves? Like, I felt like the Eagles had the strongest roster by far coming out of the season. That proved itself in the Super Bowl. You think anybody has helped themselves out to the extent where you feel like they may be able to challenge the Eagles?
My biggest worry would be right in your own division, Washington.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of not only Dan Quinn, but their general manager, Adam Peters. And I think they're tied at the hip philosophically. When you've got a young quarterback like they do, and you can build around him, you look what they've done offensively. They made 2 trades. They got Deebo Samuel for a 5th, and they got him for a 5th because they absorbed his contract. I think you're going to have a pissed-off Deebo Samuel next year who's going to be in shape and play at a high level with Terry McLaurin. Then they made a trade, which I thought was the key trade that they made, was Laramie Tunsil, who's only 31 years old, probably still one of the best 5 left tackles in football. That needed to happen for them. They need to upgrade that offensive line. And then a couple of moves they made that I thought were under the radar. They got both their tight ends back. Zach Ertz, who Philly's familiar with, and I think was kind of a security blanket for that young quarterback. And they got John Bates, their other tight end, back. Then they go back and get Bobby Wagner on defense. They get a couple veteran defensive tackles. I thought Washington did a heck of a job in the first week. I thought Chicago really replenished the O-line and D-line, which is what they needed, especially with their young quarterback. They're the 2 teams that kind of caught my eye last week in the NFC.
Yeah, actually, speaking of the NFC East, I know I said last one, but one more. A 2-part why in the world question. Why in the world would Aaron Rodgers want to go to the Giants, and why in the world would the Giants want to sign Aaron Rodgers?
Well, the second part of that question, I think, is fairly simple, and that's because the head coach and the GM are under the gun right now, and they got to win football games, and if they don't, they're probably done this year. So right now, the only guy they have on quarterback on the roster is I forget his name.
Tommy DeVito.
Come on.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. I remember his agent, Sean Salata. But
yeah, piece of work. So, that entire Tommy DeVito operation there.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're the head coach and GM, man, you got to win games this year. So I think that's the answer to the first one. If you're Aaron Rodgers, that's one I don't really get. Other than you probably can get 2 years out of them if it's what you really want. I don't understand what's held up the deal in Pittsburgh. You know, if Pittsburgh goes out and spends top of the market money on a wideout in a trade, you know, with DK Metcalf without a plan at quarterback, I mean, that's not good football. You got to have a plan to get the ball to those wideouts. And I don't understand why that deal hasn't been done already.
All right, Mike. Well, we're going to bother you around draft time if that's okay.
Oh,
but
for sure.
We appreciate you coming on, man.
Now, I enjoy you guys, and I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike Mayock. And, you know, one thing that Mike and I are simpatico on, and we're both Kenny G heads.
Yeah, I saw that.
Kenny Gainwell heads.
That, yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that.